Rice sits quietly on millions of plates every single day, trusted, familiar, and rarely questioned. Yet, inside this simple grain, a silent chain reaction often begins the moment the first bite is swallowed, pushing blood sugar up fast, forcing insulin to rush in, and leaving the body dealing with the aftermath long after the meal is over. But what most people never hear is that this reaction is not fixed and not inevitable, because one small overlooked addition can completely change how rice behaves inside the body, slowing glucose release, calming insulin spikes, and even feeding the gut instead of stressing it. And this video uncovers exactly how that works and why science is now paying close attention to it, because researchers discovered that rice can be transformed from a fast sugar trigger into a slower, gut-friendly food, using a method so simple it feels almost unbelievable, and the impact goes far beyond blood sugar alone, reaching digestion, metabolism, and long-term health in ways most people never connect to a bowl of rice. And by the end of this video, you will understand why two people can eat the same rice and get totally different glucose responses, why the order and preparation of food matters more than the food itself, and why insulin spikes are not just about sugar, but about structure, timing, and chemistry happening at a microscopic level. And you will learn the one add-in that quietly changes the structure of rice starch, turning part of it into something your body cannot rapidly digest, something that behaves more like fiber than sugar, something your gut bacteria love, but your blood sugar barely notices. And this is not about cutting rice out, not about extreme diets, not about replacing cultural foods with trends, but about upgrading what you already eat in a smarter way. And throughout this video, you will see how glucose spikes start, why they feel invisible at first, how they slowly damage energy levels and hunger signals, and how one small change can soften that impact without changing taste or tradition. And you will also learn why freshly cooked rice acts differently than cooled rice, why reheating does not undo the benefits, and why your gut plays a bigger role in blood sugar control than most people realize, especially when certain starches escape digestion and reach the colon intact, feeding beneficial bacteria that send calming signals back to your metabolism. And there is a reason this information is rarely discussed in everyday health advice, because it sits between nutrition, chemistry, and digestion, and it does not fit into simple good food versus bad food thinking. But once you understand it, you cannot look at rice the same way again. And if you stay until the end, you will also discover common mistakes that quietly cancel these benefits, why portion size still matters even with smarter rice, and how this one tweak fits into real-life meals without stress or rules. So if rice is part of your daily life, and you care about steady energy, gut comfort, and avoiding unnecessary insulin spikes, this is one of the most practical lessons you can learn. Welcome to our channel, where we break down complex health science into simple ideas you can actually use. And if you want more clear research-backed tips like this, make sure to subscribe now and stay with us. White rice looks calm and harmless on the plate, but once it enters the body, it moves fast, much faster than most people expect. Because white rice is made mostly of refined starch with very little fiber left behind, and that means digestion starts almost immediately in the mouth and continues rapidly in the stomach and small intestine, breaking the starch down into glucose that rushes into the bloodstream. And this quick rise in blood sugar does not give the body time to respond gently. So insulin is released in a sharp wave to pull that glucose out of the blood and into cells. And this sharp rise followed by a sharp drop is what creates the classic spike and crash pattern. Many people feel a sudden hunger, low energy, or cravings soon after eating. And when this happens once in a while, the body can cope. But when it happens day after day, meal after meal, the system begins to strain. Insulin has to work harder, cells become less responsive, and blood sugar control slowly becomes less stable. And at the same time, the gut is affected because fast digesting starch leaves very little behind for gut bacteria, which means the microbes that help regulate inflammation, appetite, and metabolism are left underfed. And over time, this imbalance can weaken digestion, increase bloating, and disrupt signals between the gut and the brain, creating a cycle where the body asks for more quick energy while becoming worse at handling it. And this is why white rice, despite being a staple food for so many cultures, often shows up in discussions about glucose spikes and metabolic stress, not because it is toxic or unnatural, but because its structure has been changed to digest too efficiently, removing the natural brakes that slow sugar release. The speed at which food raises blood sugar is closely linked to something called the glycemic index, which is simply a way to describe how fast carbohydrates turn into glucose in the blood. And white rice sits high on that scale because it lacks fiber and resistant components, while foods that digest more slowly tend to cause gentler rises in blood sugar. And this difference matters because the body prefers stability over extremes. Slow rises allow insulin to work calmly, keeping energy steady and reducing stress on the pancreas, while fast rises demand quick responses that are harder to sustain over time. And fiber plays a major role here because it slows digestion, thickens the contents of the gut, and physically delays how quickly enzymes can access starch molecules. But white rice contains very little fiber, which means nothing stands in the way of rapid breakdown. And this is where the gut connection becomes important, because when carbohydrates move too quickly through the small intestine, very little reaches the colon, where gut bacteria live. And those bacteria rely on certain types of starch to produce beneficial compounds that support gut lining health and insulin sensitivity. And without that fuel, the microbial balance can shift in less helpful directions. One type of carbohydrate that behaves very differently inside the body is resistant starch. And unlike regular starch, resistant starch resists digestion in the small intestine and passes through largely intact to the colon, where it becomes food for beneficial bacteria. And when these bacteria ferment resistant starch, they produce short-chain fatty acids that help strengthen the gut barrier, reduce inflammation, and improve insulin signaling. And this process happens quietly and slowly without sudden glucose spikes, which is why foods rich in resistant starch tend to have a gentler effect on blood sugar. And what makes this especially interesting is that resistant starch is not fixed. It can increase or decrease depending on how food is prepared, cooked, cooled, and combined with other ingredients. And rice is one of the most surprising examples of this transformation. When rice is cooked in water alone, most of its starch remains easily digestible. But when a small amount of fat is added before cooking, something changes at the molecular level, because fat interacts with the starch granules as they swell and gelatinize during cooking, forming complexes that enzymes have a harder time breaking down. And this interaction creates a structure that slows digestion. And when the cooked rice is then cooled, even more changes occur as the starch molecules realign and crystallize in a process called retrogradation, which further increases resistance to digestion. And the result is rice that behaves very differently inside the body, releasing glucose more slowly and allowing a portion of the starch to reach the gut intact. This is where the so-called magic addition comes into play, not because it is exotic or expensive, but because it quietly alters how rice is processed by the body. And adding a small amount of fat, such as coconut oil or another stable cooking fat, before cooking rice allows this fat to bind with starch molecules during heat exposure, creating a form that is less accessible to digestive enzymes. And this does not require large quantities, dramatic flavor changes, or special equipment, but it does require understanding that food is chemistry as much as it is calories. And once the rice is cooked and then cooled, the effect becomes stronger because cooling allows the starch-fat complexes to set, increasing the proportion of resistant starch. And even when the rice is reheated later, much of this resistant structure remains, meaning the benefits are not lost with warming. Inside the body, this altered rice moves more slowly through the digestive system. Glucose enters the bloodstream at a calmer pace. Insulin responds more smoothly, and the gut receives more fermentable material, feeding beneficial bacteria that help regulate metabolism from behind the scenes. And this combination leads to lower glucose spikes, improved insulin response, and better gut nourishment, not through restriction, but through modification. And this is why two bowls of rice that look identical can behave very differently depending on how they were prepared, even though most people assume rice is just rice. The interaction between fat and starch during cooking is subtle but powerful because starch granules are not static. They absorb water, swell, and change shape under heat. And when fat is present, it can insert itself into these structures, reducing how easily digestive enzymes can attach. And this slows the conversion of starch into glucose. And when cooling follows, the starch chains realign into tighter formations that resist breakdown even more. And resistant starch then passes into the colon, where it supports microbial diversity and produces compounds that influence insulin sensitivity, appetite hormones, and inflammation. And this is why gut health and blood sugar control are deeply linked, even though they are often discussed separately. Over time, repeatedly eating rice prepared in a way that reduces rapid glucose release can ease the daily burden placed on insulin, help stabilize energy levels, and support a healthier gut environment. And this does not mean rice becomes a free food or that portion size no longer matters, but it does mean the body experiences it differently with less shock and more balance. And this difference accumulates quietly, meal after meal, shaping metabolic health in ways that are easy to miss until problems appear. And by understanding this process, rice stops being a problem food and becomes a flexible one, capable of fitting into a healthier pattern without forcing extreme changes. The gut plays a central role in this entire process because resistant starch acts as a signal, not just a fuel, telling gut bacteria to produce substances that strengthen the intestinal lining and improve communication with metabolic tissues. And when the gut barrier is strong, inflammation stays lower, insulin signals travel more clearly, and glucose regulation improves. And this is why foods that feed the gut often improve blood sugar control indirectly. And rice prepared with this method contributes to that effect by delivering resistant starch where it matters most. This slow, steady digestion contrasts sharply with the rapid breakdown of plain white rice, where glucose floods the bloodstream and leaves little behind for the gut. And over time, that difference can shape how the body handles carbohydrates in general, influencing hunger signals, cravings, and energy patterns throughout the day. And understanding this shift reframes rice not as an enemy, but as a tool that can be adjusted through simple preparation choices, changing its impact without changing its role in meals. And this approach respects tradition while applying modern understanding of digestion, metabolism, and gut health, showing that small changes at the cooking stage can ripple through the body in meaningful ways without requiring strict rules or deprivation. Once the rice has been prepared in a way that changes its internal structure, there are a few simple habits that can quietly multiply the benefits without adding complexity to daily life. And one of the most powerful is allowing the rice to cool and then reheating it later, because cooling gives starch molecules time to reorganize into forms that resist digestion. And this process continues even after reheating, meaning the rice does not suddenly turn back into a fast sugar source just because it is warm again. And this is important because many people assume reheating ruins nutritional value, when in this case it actually preserves a key benefit. And by making rice ahead of time and using it later, the body receives a slower, more controlled release of glucose, while the gut receives more resistant starch. And this simple timing shift changes how the meal is processed without changing flavor or comfort. And alongside this, adding vegetables or other sources of fiber at the same meal creates another layer of protection, because fiber slows how quickly food leaves the stomach and enters the small intestine, physically delaying starch breakdown and smoothing the rise of blood sugar. And when fiber is present, enzymes take longer to reach carbohydrates, glucose enters the bloodstream more gradually, and insulin can respond calmly instead of rushing in. And vegetables also bring bulk and volume, which naturally reduces how quickly rice is eaten and increases satiety, making it easier to stop at a reasonable portion without feeling restricted. Eating rice together with protein or healthy fats further steadies the glucose response, because protein slows digestion and triggers hormones that reduce appetite, while fats delay stomach emptying and reduce how quickly carbohydrates are absorbed. And when these elements are combined in one meal, blood sugar rises more smoothly and stays stable longer, avoiding sharp peaks and sudden drops. And this balanced approach mirrors how traditional meals were often structured, with rice rarely eaten alone but paired with legumes, vegetables, fish, or meats. And these combinations were not accidental. They created metabolic balance long before blood sugar meters existed. And by returning to this pattern, modern meals become easier on the body without sacrificing cultural foods. Problems arise when these supportive elements are missing, and one of the most common mistakes is eating rice by itself, because without fiber, protein, or fat, the starch digests quickly and glucose floods the bloodstream, creating a sharp insulin response that can lead to energy crashes and hunger soon after. And this pattern is especially challenging for people already dealing with insulin resistance or unstable blood sugar, because repeated spikes make regulation harder over time. And another common mistake is eating rice only when it is freshly cooked and steaming hot, because freshly cooked rice contains more easily digestible starch and less resistant starch, meaning glucose enters the blood more rapidly. And while hot rice is comforting, relying on it exclusively misses the opportunity to slow digestion through cooling and reheating. And ignoring portion size adds another layer of strain, because even rice prepared in a smarter way still contains carbohydrates, and large portions can overwhelm the benefits by delivering more glucose than the body can comfortably manage at once. And portion awareness works alongside preparation methods, not against them. These habits do not require strict rules or complicated planning, but they do require awareness of how small choices stack together. Because rice eaten alone, hot, and in large amounts behaves very differently from rice eaten with vegetables, protein, and fat prepared ahead of time and enjoyed in moderate portions. And the difference is not just numbers on a glucose monitor, but how the body feels afterward, how long energy lasts, and how hunger signals behave later in the day. And when these supportive habits become routine, insulin spikes soften, digestion feels calmer, and the gut receives more nourishment instead of stress. And over time, this creates a pattern where rice fits into meals without driving constant glucose swings, allowing the body to handle carbohydrates with more stability and less effort. And this quiet consistency is what makes the approach practical, because it does not depend on willpower, but on preparation and pairing that work with the body instead of against it. Rice does not need to be feared, removed, or replaced. It just needs to be understood. And with one small change, you can turn a food that once caused sharp glucose spikes into something that works more gently with your body, supporting steadier energy, a calmer insulin response, and a healthier gut over time. And the real power of this idea is how simple it is, because it fits into normal meals, normal kitchens, and normal routines without forcing extreme rules or sacrifice. So try this method today. Pay attention to how your body feels after the meal. Notice your energy, your hunger, and your digestion. And if you do try it, share your experience or questions in the comments so others can learn from you too. And if this kind of clear, practical health science helps you, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who eats rice regularly, and subscribe to the channel for more simple, evidence-based tips you can actually use every day.